Yeah, look at that. Hello folks, my name is Beck and I create work under the name Urban Projections. Urban Projections sounds like it's a much bigger thing, but it's essentially just myself producing work in sometimes collaborations, but most of the time just by myself. And I predominantly use projection as a medium. But that can take lots and lots of different forms, so sometimes out on the street, sometimes huge scale on the side of buildings, projection mapped pieces, that have huge budgets, down to small guerrilla style stuff where we create little kind of mobile systems for going out and projecting. Other times it might be on a stage, at a large event such as Glastonbury, where we're providing kind of stage design for musicians, inside of nightclubs. It might be installation work, it might be based in a gallery, for example. So it's a really wide kind of scheme of things that I do, I guess. Ordinarily, it's mostly live performative based work, but also installation, a small amount of video, and a very tiny amount of print and web based as well. But today I've been kind of asked here to chat to you guys in 10 minutes, and it's a whistle-stop tour, so I apologise for that, me talking really fast. About how I began to create a sort of visual language for myself as an artist, doing what I do. And this started back when I was much younger as a teenager. I was working within a performance company, which was an inclusive performance company, where I was working with a number of people who had different visual impairments, and also we had several members of the company who were deaf as well, that didn't hear. And at the time, I was kind of living in another life as a scratch DJ, and I used to teach DJing and kind of go out demoing software and hardware for Stanton, who are DJ manufacturers. So I was asked to see if we could kind of figure out a way of inclusively doing a DJ workshop for everybody in the group. So we were using methods of touch, beat matching, exploring frequencies within sound so that everybody could experience sound. And then I started applying that to visuals as well. So with different company members, we were basically just experimenting between ourselves, saying, okay, so these members of the company can see this. How about if we change it ever so slightly, up the contrast, can these members of the company now see it? And it's a matter of kind of just trial and experiment, really. And that's where it all started and kind of led on. So within my work, eventually I settled into a sort of formula of creating visuals, or my projections, that kind of follow a little bit of a pattern. And rather than actually kind of talking about it, I'll show you some images. So the kind of work that I produce is quite, I use the word contrast, in that I use quite bold forms, a lot of black and white and choice colours, essentially. So if I skip through these, you'll get an idea of the kind of look of it, essentially. And I started to create a little bit of a mantra for myself when I was producing work, because as any artist, you kind of sit down and you sometimes have to ask yourself why you're making the work that you create, and have a little bit of a formula for making it. And the important bits for us, and specifically going back to those early days within the performance company, and making it accessible for more people to visually be able to experience, essentially, was for, to number one, simplify the visual aesthetic of what we were creating. So it's very easy to make visually complex work that might have lots of textures, depths of colour, gradients, and generally beautify things to a really large degree. And actually the reality of it was, if we just kind of considered that a little bit more and broke it down and simplified what the message of the aesthetic was, the reality was that more people were actually able to see it in a projected form. So number one was to simplify, and actually we found that white light can be a really beautiful thing, and that's something that I took with me and kind of ran with as an artist, and became my number one, really. That as a projection artist, the world is your oyster, as any artist is visually or sonically. You could create anything. But actually for me, the one thing that was really exciting was the simplicity of white light and what beautiful things you could do with that. And we'll explore that a little bit in a moment. But the second thing was to declutter. We live in a world where we're bombarded constantly in a visual format, especially with moving image. If we watch a TV, we're constantly bombarded with clutter, quite frankly. We go out and we see, you just have to walk outside straight away out here. We're visually bombarded with lots and lots of information. So for me, it was about decluttering that back a little bit and simplifying the aesthetic message that I was trying to deliver again, and thinking about why I was doing that. And again, we found that helped really focus the aesthetic and the visual, again, so that it was actually more easy to decipher for people who may have visual impairments. And then the next one was what I just kind of mentioned before, high contrast. The realisation that using high contrast imagery actually has a really, really massive impact. And we'll see some of the work that I produced that basically works with that aesthetic. The other good thing about using high contrasting imagery is actually, from a very, very practical point of view, if we were then to project that, say, in a theatre environment, on a stage, in an installation environment, that almost, I'd say 99% of the time, you know that the projection is actually going to look good because you're playing to the strengths of the technology. If you create something that's high contrasting, you know, in a bright room like this, you're going to have maximum impact with whatever projector it is that you're using. If you use something that's not as high contrasting, some of the finer details may get lost. It's a really practical thing, but something that can potentially have really high impact. So I'm going to show you a short video. This is a video that we produced last year, so it's about a year and a half ago, I think, something like that. This was a piece, it was an experimental piece of video that we did in collaboration with some young choreographers. So it was a live performance that also got filmed. This was created over in Mansfield, not too far away, in a black box theatre space. The idea being that we wanted to create something that looked really, really beautiful with white light and some dancers, essentially, with just a SIPE, a white screen behind them, and a projector that wasn't a massive projector, not a massively expensive projector, just the kind of standard thing that you might get in a space such as this, and see what we could create that looked really exciting. But it really went back to those values of simple white light, contrast, and how we can really make the most of that. So that contrast in between a really dark black space and something disappearing in a really white space that suddenly is illuminated and lit. And we had this, hopefully, fingers crossed. So this piece, really, the heart of it was seeing if we could create a piece that used contrast to the maximum and hopefully made this more accessible for people with visual impairments. And also, just to really play with the idea of white light. Now, this video itself is available online, just the animated elements, because it's just basically dancers in front of a white cyc. There's no kind of mapped content, anything, you know, technical that's going on there that's more complex. It's available online for other dance companies as well to kind of download and play with and see what they can create from it as well. So moving on then, this piece does use colour within it, but as you can see, we did kind of limit ourselves quite a little bit just to kind of using black and white and gradients of that. But then also, the other idea of perhaps using colour within our work. The majority of colour that I use within the pieces are very, very selective. So it tends to be black and white with just little accents of colour every now and again through it. And that again kind of helps this sort of contrasting look. Occasionally I do go a little bit crazy, and we go with huge splashes of colour, and that's to have more kind of like maximum impact. So I'm not doing anything wishy-washy in between, it's either one or the other, so it's using colour with black and white to really maximise it and highlight those little moments, or it's using a full-on colour onslaught so you can't miss it really. And even within that you can see that you're still using quite high contrasting colours on top of each other basically. So I'm going to finish on a piece actually that we did with Nathan. So this was a piece based on a poem by Kate Riley, I believe, wasn't it? Yeah. It's a really beautiful poem, and it's about her experience, am I correct? And so this is her experience of visual impairment. And we put a visual together, basically, based on the poem, that then had a performance alongside it in front of me. So I'll unmute it before I press play. Let's not forget to do that.
Columbus got it wrong. The world is flat, without dimension, but such colour, shapes. How do we describe seeing? Definition: see, verb. Have or use power of perceiving with eye. Decry, observe, look at, discern mentally, be passive spectator of. My sight is not passive, it is maverick, flattening the world with a stroke of the retina. Buildings fall into straight lines at my glance. At my mercurial eye, the earth trembles. Lie clear, I strike flat the thick rotundity of the world. I walk down the road, not knowing if the car before me is moving or stationary. I walk down the road with my bird-like cranings, the tilt of the jerking head, the eye monitoring, deceiving, explaining, deciphering. Was that a black cat, or just a blind spot crossing my path? Forever optimistic. A cat it was. I will be in luck today. No, it was a manhole uncovered. I fall down. I will still be in luck today.
So folks, does anyone have any quick questions at all they'd like to ask at this stage? I am around on a duration, so if there is anything that you'd like to ask.